everybody. Again, I should say. Hello again. Welcome to this week's episode. I'm delighted this week to be able to welcome Liz Fenwick, she of bestselling Cornwall blockbusting books. Thank you so much for being here, Liz. It's so nice to see you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Being in Cornwall during this whole crazy world time is not a bad place to be.
Exactly. You're tucked down the end. And when everybody was locked down, it must have felt lovely having the place to yourself for once.
It was. It also made us a bit funny when people started arriving. You know, the walks that you'd had in splendid isolation were suddenly, oh, there's somebody else on my path.
Damn them. Do you know, I have not been to Cornwall since I was a child, and it's something that I really must remedy.
Yeah, you should. You must come down and visit.
I'll come out of season because I quite like a wild cliffside walk with wind, and I don't mind a bit of bad weather.
I actually prefer Cornwall in the off season. I love it in winter because you still can get those startling blue skies, but with a bitingly cold wind.
Yeah, that's fine. I do miss the sea if I don't get close to it too often. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent about Cornwall. We'll get back to Cornwall, but I wanted you to start by just telling us a bit about you and your books for anyone who doesn't know.
Well, my books are all set in Cornwall, and I think a reader recently pitched it quite well in a Goodreads review. They're feel-good stories with a bit more.
Oh, I like that.
And I thought that kind of summed it up, because I will take the reader through a bit of heartache before a very hopeful ending. So I'm not leaving you on the floor quietly dying. Yeah. I will have lifted you up by the end of it, I hope. So yeah, and all my settings are interwoven with everything that's Cornwall.
I think
so if you need a trip to Cornwall and can't make it, pick up a book.
Do the tourist board know about this? Are you on the payroll?
No, I'm not on the payroll. It was really funny in recent years. We've noticed we wouldn't necessarily see the difference in regular English tourist, but there's been an increase in foreign license plates, particularly where I sell.
Ooh, so that is very good news. Very good news. That and lots of women on the hunt for pole darks, I imagine.
Yes, absolutely, but we're the wrong coast for that.
Yeah.
That's the North Coast.
Okay.
We're a slightly more, well, not always gentle. I mean, if you go down to Lizard Point, it's not gentle at all. But where we are tucked in here with the Helford River, it's quite gentle, as the cliffs are smaller and kind of gently go down into the sea.
Okay. So what is it about Cornwall? Why do you love it so much? Why? Because I know you've lived in lots and lots of different places around the world. So how come Cornwall stole your heart in the end?
Ooh, I've thought about this an awful lot. And the first time I came down, my husband was, I thought, introducing me to his parents. But it was the Cornwall test. And he wasn't my husband then, obviously. But if I hadn't fallen in love with Cornwall that weekend, we've just celebrated our 29th wedding anniversary. I don't think that would happen. But it was a glorious June weekend, and I did fall in love with it. And I think when I decided I wanted to write fiction again, I realized that I can never truly belong to Cornwall. I'm not Cornish. There is nothing that holds me here. So by writing about it, I, in a way, hold on to it.
That's very
and
true,
particularly when I was writing the first books, I was living in Dubai.
Wow.
You know, there I was looking at sunshine and bougainvillea, writing about horizontal rain. You know, and longing for it. I mean, absolutely longing for horizontal rain.
Yeah. I can imagine it must be like that when you're in the middle of a desert, which essentially Dubai is, of course. I always think it's bizarre when I've flown through there. What do you think readers love about Cornwall so much? Because it is a very, very popular location, I think, in fiction. You quite often see it popping up. And
more and more
than Aidan Turner, you know, shirtless in a field. I think it's got to be more than that.
The Poldark effect certainly played into it, particularly for a new generation of readers, but it's always been there. I mean, you've had Rosamund Pilcher, you've had Daphne du Maurier, along with the Winston Graham books, and many, many others. But anybody who's been here, and so many people have spent childhood holidays here, it is one of those things that you cross the Tamar and it feels like a magic place. It feels like a place that the most amazing things can happen in, and it weaves its spell around you. The landscape is a bit raw in places and wild, and I think that invites stories and invites people to want to exist in that place.
Am I right in thinking that Cornwall's has quite a lot of folklore and sort of stories about pixies and fairies and such?
Oh, the
I remember a
folklore.
wishing well from when I was a child, a sort of really vivid memory, and being told, you know, this is where the fairies come at night and all this kind of stuff. Is that quite common still?
Absolutely still common. It is magic, all the little things that are woven around it. I mean, you stumble across wishing wells or holy wells all over the place. I mean, if you look at the Ordnance Survey map, you think, my God, you're practically stepping in one every footstep in some
It's a very
parts.
lucky place. Have you made
Yes,
any wishes?
I have along the way, but it is extraordinary because you could be walking. We were walking along the coastline around Mullion, and all of a sudden, one of those weird moments when not a crow, it's a chough, and they make a really intense cry. They do chuff in their noise. And I looked around, and then on this rocky outcrop, there were all these little offering bits. And I thought,
Oh.
ooh, interesting. And you frequently come across the holy well sites, and you'll still see the clutie, or however you pronounce it. People have tied things on. It still goes on. It's marvelous.
I love that. See, means I have to come. I have to come. I mean, obviously Cornwall's beautiful, but I think your writing room view is got to be one of the best of any author I've ever seen. And
It's a little hard to turn the computer to give it to you. It is a really stunning view, although it's not the sea. I think that's probably the only thing that would top it for me, is if I had a sea view. But yeah. I look down into a valley and up to the hillside.
Wow.
On the other thing, and it's just, you know, inevitably it's cows or heifers, or the other day when the weather was really bad in June, I suddenly saw these white blobs on the hillside and realized there were rams taking shelter literally under the hedge.
Oh, bless them.
Because the way the wind was coming, they were taking it full on in that field.
Is setting important to you then when you settle down to write? Do you prefer to be in your writing room, or can you sort of knuckle down and put pen to paper anywhere you happen to find yourself?
First draft, anywhere. And I think that's a product of when I was writing for, when I was trying to be published and the kids were small. I would take any 5 minutes I had. I would frequently be sitting with them around the table, and they'd be doing homework, and I'd be trying to write a sex scene. Oh, tricky one. Get those things, and hope that a really precocious reader among them wasn't, you know, watching. But there was a funny incident when I was doing that, and I had a very precocious reader in the house, and I was putting down kind of euphemisms for things, and I handed it to my husband to proofread because I'm a dyslexic, and he said, "What the heck is going on here?" Oh God, I've forgotten to change it.
Amazing. I remember writing on a train once, because I used to commute in and out of London before lockdown quite often, and I'm on these packed trains, you know, with all the germs going around circling, and I remember writing one of those sort of nuts and bolts scenes, and the man next to me, I could feel him sort of leaning. There was more and more like pressure on my arm. He was obviously reading over my shoulder, and I sort of turned and looked at him, and he's like beetroot red. And I was thinking, oh, well, obviously it's having an effect, so that must be a good sign. He didn't say anything, but he must have been like, Jesus, I'm sat next to the next E.L. James or something. It wasn't quite that bad. No. Quite that saucy, I should say. Not bad. So your most recent novel is The Path to the Sea.
Yes.
And it features, I'd say, one of the characters of the book really is the big cliffside house. And tell me if I'm saying this right. Boskenna?
Boskenna. Yeah.
Okay. So how much of a character did the house become as you were writing, and was it based on somewhere real? Or is it all in your imagination?
Definitely based on somewhere real. It's based on the house that they filmed the Cornish Parts of About Time, the last Richard Curtis film that came out.
I love that film. Yeah, I love that.
And I fell in love with the house when I saw the film. I mean, I adored the film. And then of course, I was researching. I was on the internet, and I'm looking at a blog post about houses and films that you could rent.
Ah, wow.
And I thought, oh. And at the time, I was working through an idea for different books, and that was the final piece. So I actually did rent it. Because my houses in my books really feature in such a strong way that I need to know what it feels like. And it's a big house. It sleeps 21.
Gosh.
And, you know, part of the book is set in 1962 when the house would be filled to the limits. And then the modern day story, there's practically no one living in it. So the start of the week, I invited friends and family down, and we filled it with 21. And I made everybody dress up, preferably in vintage, but if they didn't have vintage, black tie.
Yeah.
And we served a sort of retro meal because the dining room is magnificent. It, you know, it seats 20, not 21, but fortunately the 21st was a baby in this case. And the walls are lined. It's a library as well.
Wow.
And of course, unlike then, I didn't have servants. So I and a trusted few were cooking for that many. But we had a fantastic night. And one of the people who came is he was at university with my son. He's now doing a PhD in astrophysics at Cambridge. But he's also a brilliant pianist. And there's a grand piano. And he played until 3 in the morning.
Wow.
And we were dancing and singing and riotous. It was such fun.
This is the dream author life. You're like, when people wonder what authors do and how their lives are, they should just listen to this interview, because you're like, you know, looking out at the views of Cornwall, going to houses with astrophysicists who play piano till 3 a.m. I love it.
That's the fun bits. And then they all left, and there were 4 of us left in the house. And that's when I really spent the time. I experienced what it would be like to be a glamorous party with, you know, this lawn that overlooks the most spectacular view and everything else. And then what shocked me, because I expected the house to feel too big when there were just 4 of us in it, and it didn't. The house wrapped itself around us. And it's extraordinary how that changed the story.
Yeah. It's how great to get those different perspectives, though.
Well, a bit like one Cornish summer, I used Godolphin House and moved it physically, but we stayed in that. And that is not a house that wraps itself around you in a warm hug. I'll leave it there. It's a great house. It's a wonderful setting.
Yeah.
But we found it to be haunted.
Oh, gosh. Oh, my God.
Yes.
Actually. Wow.
Yes.
Because I've often heard things and bangs, but I'm not, I don't know, maybe I'm just not tuned in.
I didn't think I was, but I think the thing that shook me the most is my mother was over with us at the time. And my mother is a very devout Catholic. She's up early. She prays 4 hours a day. She practically lives the life of a nun these days. Oh. And she woke one night to somebody standing over her. And she doesn't believe in ghosts. So, you know, it was just one of those things. Having said that, would I stay in the house again? Yes, I definitely would. Because nothing sinister happened with it. It was just that feeling of others with you.
That would be amazing, actually. I might take my mum for a treat, because she would love that. She loves all that kind of stuff. So with your books, do you tend to begin with a place, or is it a character, or maybe an emotion or an anecdote, or is it sort of a mixed bag? And once you have the idea, how do you then twist that spark into a big fiery furnace of story? Terrible metaphor, but you know what I mean.
No, I know. Does the spark have enough legs to take you through the end of 100,000 words?
Are you going to cook your dinner or not?
It's kind of funny. Every book has been slightly different. I've used folklore. In The Corner Stranger, I was researching for the previous book, and I came across save a stranger from the sea and he'll turn your enemy. And I thought, oh, that works. And I instantly knew that it was between a granddaughter and a grandmother, and the setting was on the cabin at the mouth of Frenchman's Creek. Bingo. And it just went from there. For The Path to the Sea, it was a slower reckoning. My mother-in-law passed away 15 years ago anyways. And I was handed this chock-a-full battered notebook. My sister-in-law said, here, you take this one. I'm thinking, oh, great. What do I do with it? I stuck it on my bookshelf, and fellow writer Bridget Cody came down, and I was cooking, and she was just going through the bookshelves, pulled it off, and she said, oh, this is really interesting. And she was going through it. And in that notebook, my mother-in-law had listed every dinner party she'd given in the 60s and the 70s. And not only was it listed, it was the menus, the recipes, the guest list, the seating plan, and on some occasions, what she wore.
Wow.
And she was doing this several times a week. And it was just this complete window on a world that, you know, seems so foreign to how we live today. And I thought, wow. And Biddy said, oh, you need to write the Cornish Supper Club. And I'm thinking, no, that's not quite it. And my husband walked in and he said, oh, yeah, those dinner parties, they were fabulous. The food was wonderful. And he used to be in the kitchen with the woman that used to come in and give my mother-in-law a hand. He'd be waiting at the serving hatch for his favorite food to come back. I thought, what happens if a child witnesses something that changes their life forever, but doesn't understand it at the time? So then I had, okay, glamorous 1960s setting, child witnessing something. And the final piece for me was finding the location. And Boskenna was the perfect house. It's actually Porthbean House. So that is the way that book came together. But every book I find is different, don't you?
Definitely. And I think one of the best things about being a writer, and one of the most exciting things, is you never know where those little sparks are going to sort of flare up. And you can, you know, it can be the most anodyne conversation or the most bog standard, you know, going to the petrol station to buy some toilet roll experience, and you'll have a conversation, or you exchange a glance, or you'll see a headline on the paper outside, and it will completely just go bang in your head. And I find the only problem is that happens quite a lot to me, and I don't have time to write them all down. I tend to keep a notebook in my bag all the time and write these things down and write how I felt when I heard things, and then I may go back to them or I may not. But it's good to always have a body of notes there in case you run out of ideas, but that's yet to happen, thank God. But yeah.
With me. But I do keep a notebook here, but I tend to use my phone. I send myself emails.
Yes, or like, Siri, remind me to write now. Yeah. Yes. She's like, okay, she's off again. She's off on one. So what are you working on at the moment? Can you tell us anything about your new project?
Oh, gosh, it seems like this project's been a long time in the making, but in truth, it hasn't. I tend to like ideas to rest a bit in my mind, a bit like The Path to the Sea had been there for a while until the final piece came together. This book began a year ago in February when I was talking to my editor about what book was next. And she, of course, picked the most recent idea. And I had this vague notion because a month earlier, I'd picked my husband up and we were going for a weekend away. It was the middle of January. The weather was complete murk. And the sat-nav took us the most obscure route to this hotel that we were going to. And we suddenly come across this ancient bridge that we can barely see. It's a medieval bridge built in 1437 or something, and it crosses the Tamar, and it's the oldest bridge still there. Oh, I thought, oh, I feel stories, they're shimmering.
Yeah.
And we arrive at the hotel, which is Hotel Ensley, which is the old hunting and fishing lodge of the Dukes of Bedford. That's now owned by Olga Polizzi. And I walked through the door into the entrance hall with the roaring fire, and I thought, it's a World War I story. And that's what I went to my editor with.
Yeah.
And so I'm still editing the damn thing. It's taken a while. We still haven't finalized the title, but I've always been fascinated how the Tamar divides not just the two counties of Devon and Cornwall, it divides the people. So I've got a story set on both banks, and think forbidden love, forgotten crossings, a forlorn cottage and new beginnings. So it'll be dual timeline, leading up to World War I, and then in 1920, and the modern day story kind of revealing the secrets of the past.
You must have had so much fun sort of researching that era as well. And
It took a lot, a bit like when I did The Returning Tide, when I tackled World War II. Being raised in the States, the history that you learn and just what you absorb from your elders is very different.
Of course.
So for me, it's almost going back to scratch.
Mm.
And if I had my way, I'd probably just continually spend my whole time in research. I mean, one of the rabbit holes I went down to, which was quite important for the background of the stories, I ended up reading the complete journals of the Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry from 1914 until the end of the war.
Wow.
And none of that is actually in the book.
No, but it gave you that great grounding and that background in your mind.
Yeah,
I always think
because
it's like a tapestry, isn't it? That you're only going to ever be in one small pocket of it, but you need the landscape around you.
So it's taken me longer than I anticipated to do this book, but it also didn't have the brewing time, and I think brewing time is important.
Definitely. I call it the percolation.
Yes.
Drop in the grounds and wait for them to rise. If you try and drink it too soon, it's just going to taste terrible and watery. Yes. Well, I'm drafting at the moment, so I'm not editing, thankfully. I think lockdown and a structural edit probably would have been the end of me. That would have just, I just would have found a little hole to hide in, and that would have been it.
I've delivered in the middle.
That I'm at that stage at the moment, because I think it's the less pressure. I think there's less pressure when you're drafting, and you feel like you're doing it just for you, even though you're not. You kind of are, but yeah. Right, we've reached the quick fire round. I've got this little coconut shell of questions. So what I usually do is just shake it like maracas and see what falls out. Let's see. Right, 3 have fallen out. Let's see. Let's go. Question number 1. Oh, what's the first book that you can remember reading?
Myself?
Yes.
Clifford the Big Red Dog.
Ah, straight away. Was that a favourite as a child?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you give us a brief synopsis? What happens?
Don't remember. Just remember him and how much I enjoyed those books. And I should remember because I introduced them to my children as well.
Oh, amazing.
I remember being in bed reading them and loving them.
My first dog book was a book called Dogger, and it's about a little girl who has a little dog called Dogger, and her sister has loads and loads and loads of cuddly toys, and she just has the one dog, and then she manages to lose him, and he ends up being sold at a fairground to another child, and then the older sister swaps her massive best teddy bear with a big blue bow that's sort of this big for Dogger so she can get it back. It's a great story. Oh, get emotional just thinking about it. Right, question 2. Oh, favourite book character of all time and why?
Oh, that one's hard.
It's hard, isn't it? I always go Jilly Cooper default. Just go straight to Rupert, even though he's a reprehensible rogue.
Yeah. So many people jump through my mind. So many characters, people calling them, jump through my mind. From recent to past to Tom Sawyer.
Tom Sawyer. That's good. It's good. Lots of people go Elizabeth Bennet, don't they, immediately as soon as...
Yeah, no, she crossed my mind, and I always loved her, but actually I think Tom Sawyer.
Okay, good answer. I like it. Right, question 3 is, the best gift you've ever received.
Christmas many moons ago, when I was still striving for publication, and I was sharing the desktop with the kids doing their homework and everything else while trying to write. And that Christmas, they presented me with my own laptop.
Oh, wow. That's
and it was at a time when money was tight and everything else, but it was just saying, we want you to be able to do this.
Yeah, we believe in you. Oh, that's so lovely. And it also meant that you could squirrel yourself away. And
yeah, it's a little bit easier.
Yeah, I mean, laptops, what did people do before? I know there's typewriters, but I can't imagine not being able to just fold up my little MacBook and take it on the train, or take it on a plane, or take it to hotels, hostels. Mine comes around the world with me, my computer.
Yeah, same. I think when I was writing, because I always wanted to write, and when I was writing in university, my senior year, I had one of the first IBM computers, you know, with MS-DOS. Well, you wouldn't know because you're too young, but
I do remember MS-DOS.
extraordinary. And
really good lamp on my face today.
And you know, that was a real eye-opener, because before then I'd actually been using my mother's old stand-up typewriter. Gosh. And of course I am dyslexic, so mistakes are abundant, and having the ability to word process really revolutionized the writing process for me.
Have you ever been able to like dictate, right? Because I know some writers will sit there and talk into their computers and it writes it for you. I've never been able to do that.
I've tried. When I broke my wrist 2 years ago, I did try, but I was too self-conscious, and I also think through my fingers.
Yes.
Or you know, when I need to slow down, I will handwrite out a scene or rewrite out a scene to do it. But I now think through my fingers. So yeah. But I do, for dyslexia, I have the computer read the book back to me, because reading the story aloud is so important. You hear the flow and everything. But of course, as a dyslexic, I don't read what's on the page. Mm-hmm. So if the computer does it, and it does it in a computerized voice, you really pick up the clunky stuff.
That's true, yeah.
Because they can't put any emotion into it.
That's true. Yeah, that is true.
It's passionately
dispassionately described. I know, I do a lot of reading aloud, actually. I do believe that. And I think it's different. Like when I'm writing the books, I feel like I sometimes write longhand if I have to, if I don't have my computer. But I know what you mean about the thinking through your fingers thing. But if I'm doing something like, recently I was asked to write some monologues for an album, for someone that's written an album in lockdown. And I couldn't do that on screen. I had to do it by hand. It was really weird. I just, because my brain was thinking in a more poetic way, I had to do it longhand. It's very weird.
It is funny, because if I do need to slow down and I need to be more descriptive than I normally would be, I do it longhand. The other thing I also do is, if I've had to step away from a work for a while, I will go down and I will take the last scene or the last few paragraphs and write them in hand in my notebook, which reconnects me to the story in a way that reading it doesn't.
Yeah, I might try that. I'm just about to rewrite the first chapter of my current book for about the 17th time, which is standard for me. But I like a first chapter. It's got to be right, because some people will give up. If they're a NetGalley or something, and they have a proof copy and they've got a pile this high, you've got to get them on that first page, haven't you?
You sure do. There is no question about it. And you know, I think the first and last chapters are always the most important bits in a way.
Yeah, I agree.
And get most rewrites.
The midpoint comes third, I think. Yeah, even the opening line, like I'll agonize for days over opening lines, and then we could talk about this all day, but let's not. The readers are listening, and it's all fine, it's easy, we love doing it.
I just stare out at my view.
Yeah.
Actually, I should try. Let's see if I can do it. I don't know if it will work or not.
Give us a little pivot. Oh yeah. You can see flowers. Oh, look at that.
The view. You get the garden, but you don't get the view.
It's so beautiful.
Off the table. I work on a standing desk, so.
Oh gosh, that's healthy. Good for you.
I found that I was getting too stiff, so I have it's a very tiny little study, and I have 4 spaces in it. I have my grandmother's desk that I sit and handwrite and do that stuff, standing desk where the computer is, window seat to stare at space, and I have a big red beanbag where I sit and read.
Lovely. You've got it all worked.
And well, it took me a while, because for a long time I had the whole house to myself. This is very important now. And I could move zones to work, because I used to love to work in my kitchen, sitting at the table, because I could see the garden and everything. But now I've got adult children home.
Yes, so you've had to give back the rest of the house to them.
Yeah, I have. I've had
to yourself away.
Yes.
Oh no, but it looks lovely, and I'm so excited to read the new book. It sounds incredible. I got goosebumps as soon as you said about the about the bridge, I was like, oh, and I loved that period of history as well. I think it's probably my
fascinating.
top.
Such an interesting time.
Yeah, so exciting. And that will be next year, spring?
Yes. Good question.
Oh, we don't know
You
yet.
know,
Yeah.
publishing schedules are.
But in the meantime, read the other books. Path to the Sea is out now, as well as the rest of your back catalogue, which you can find in good bookshops, Amazon, all the usual places, audio, ebook, all that fandango. And if you want to follow Liz on social media, how can they follow you? Are you easy?
Liz_Fenwick. And that's Twitter and Insta. If you need a Cornish fix, normally every day there's a plot walk, and there are pictures from the plot walk, 4 on Twitter, many on Insta, and I'm also under Liz Fenwick Author on Facebook.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for being with us today, and thank you everybody for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.